topic, as you have seen, that it's on the Brahmanas and the non-Brahmanas. I'm not going into the details of the caste structure of early India, but what I'm trying to do today is taking one single source. As yesterday, it was a combination of a variety of sources, and how with a variety of sources we could build up an image of everyday life. So today there's a shift in the structure, and I'm taking one single source, which are the copperplate charters. And from the copperplate charters, taking some examples from 2 or 3 regions, I will show how you have the presence of Brahmana settlements and non-Brahmana settlements, and how in some cases the copperplate charters actually not the main portion, but when a land is donated, there are boundaries described, and from the description of the boundaries, how you can understand some aspects of the rural settlement in early India. So that is the whole idea of doing this. And in that, a little bit of course, when we are doing Brahmanas or when we're talking about a social group, so some kind of textual information would crop in. But my primary source today is the epigraphic source, the inscriptions. So when we look at the copperplate charters, I'm sure some of you are aware of this kind of sources, and they are very important to us because they are normally written in inscriptions generally are written in stones or copper plates, and others are non-perishable items. And here you have, these are engraved in copper plates. And so it is for perpetuity. And I will be discussing a little bit on the structure also a little later. So the earliest land grants that we find in the Indian context came from peripheral regions of Eastern Deccan, Western Deccan, and Central India in the 4th century. Now, why it was found in the peripheral region, why not in the center, that we do not know. Even if we look at the Guptas, actually by then it was starting to crystallize. We have this term called the Agrahara system of land grant. Now, the term Agrahara, it means actually a land which was donated by the ruler to a Brahmana or to a group of Brahmanas or to a monastery, which could be a Buddhist vihara or a Brahmanical matha or a Jaina vasadi. Generally, it was more like we come across more monasteries, more viharas and mathas. Now, this term Agrahara defines itself as it is a rent-free donation, which means when the donee, that is the Brahmana or the religious institution, it gets the land from the ruler, they don't have to pay any rent to the ruler. So it is the Agrahara system which was prevalent mostly in early India in case of the donations of the copperplate charters. And we find that even the Guptas did not have many copperplate charters. We find some of them from Bengal, and 2 or 3 charters are there which are called spurious, but we are not very sure. But the people who were with the Guptas, for example, the Vakatakas, then we have a very interesting dynasty, a small dynasty on the bank of the Narmada in Madhya Pradesh called the Valkha people, the Valkha dynasty. And you must have heard about Bagh, like Ajanta paintings, Bagh paintings, have you? So in the locality of Bagh, this was the kingdom of Valkha, which was in the Narmada, and they were contemporary, the rulers were contemporary to the Guptas, and they issued copper plates as early as the 4th century, and they were very contemporary to actually Samudragupta. And they say that and if we look at this copper plates, we find that the first ruler had a very autochthonous indigenous name. His name was Bhulunda. And so the name Bhulunda signifies that, and he is called Maharaja Bhulunda, who is actually a subordinate of the Guptas, and they mention it in the copper plates. But then we find that later on, the names of the rulers also changes, and from an autochthonous name, we come across names like Swamidasa, Rudradasa, and they are not linked with each other. But they were a small kingdom packed between, it was a buffer kind of state between the Guptas in the Iran was the last stronghold of the Guptas, so within the Gupta kingdom and the Vakataka kingdom. And interestingly, here we have the earliest kind of reference to state formation because it was a state which was growing. And so in case of the copperplate charters also, you do not have the proper format that we find in the later copperplate charters, which I will talk to you. Now, when we look at the formats of the copperplate charters, it is very striking that we find that in the Dharmasasstras, this format is actually defined. And here you can see that the Dharmasasstras discuss donation of land. Donation of land is actually called to be a mahadana because it is one of the greatest danas. When you're donating a land, you get a lot of punya. And the format and the content is also discussed in the Smriti text. So lands were generally, as I mentioned, given to the Brahmanas and the religious institutions. Now, I have selected a charter, a format of the Pratiharas. Gurjara, these are the dynasty called the Gurjara Pratiharas. Now, when we look at the scenario, political scenario of India, particularly northern India, we find that from the 7th to the 8th or the 9th, we had 3 dynasties, important dynasties, taking a strong, political functions, having a lot of rivalry among themselves, and was in historical context, they were very important. So one was the Gurjara Pratihara rulers, who actually ruled in Kanauj, was one of the seat of power, and in the Rajasthan Malwa region. Another was the Palas of Bengal, who also had their eyes on Kanauj. Kanauj was the most coveted place. And then we have the Rashtrakutas from the Deccan, who were also moving into Kanauj and taking part in that, which is known in Indian history as the tripartite struggle. So the Pratiharas had a very well set out format of charters, which was also similar to the Palas. So I have chosen them. So when you look at this format, so when the charter is being written, so first you have the preamble. That is this, within the preamble, you have this invocation. We sometimes have, it is called Swasti, Siddham, it's like that, or Om. And then announcement from the donor, that is the king from the camp, and it is always mostly from Skandhavara. So we have this term called Skandhavara, which is known as sometimes Jaya Skandhavara. So they will say Jaya Skandhavarat. I'm issuing this grant from this Skandhavara. So you have this kind of military camp. The idea of a military camp comes in. And then of a certain land makes known to the officials are actually are informed that this grant is being made to this particular donee, and these are the privileges that are being granted. Then comes the body. And in the body, you have the contents of the grant, that particular village, the boundaries, what are we call these privileges or immunities, that whether this land, the person who is getting this land, he is actually enjoyer of the land, not only of the land, but it is a sajala, sthala, all the water bodies around it. Even sometimes it's mentioned that akara, the minerals are mentioned. So all kind of the width, all, and sometimes the boundaries are not given, so it is till the pasture land, Trinaputi Gochara. So it's like that. You have this kind of descriptions. Then all the incomes that will be coming from this land will be accrued to this particular Brahmana. And then in the colophon, in the last stage, you have the name of the director of the charter who actually issued this the rote, and the Dutaka, the messenger, and year and date. And sometimes you have, this is the general format, but sometimes you have the name of the scribe, and the scribes or the composers also name is there, and sometimes the genealogy also is given. So with this kind of format, let me first, these are actually, I used some diacritical marks, and perhaps those did not suit here, so you have all these kinds of symbols. So this is just to give you an idea of those who haven't seen a copper plate. So this is my source. I'm talking on the basis of this kind of materials. These are copper plate charters. It belongs to the king of Bengal. He was the first king of Bengal who made Bengal a regional power. Yesterday I said that there was no Bengal, but here actually he is a lord of Gaura. He was known as Gaura, Lord of Gaura. And in a contemporary, and you can see this is Brahmi, of course, of the 7th century, that period. And you have the contemporary ruler with whom Shashanka had a lot of differences. Was Harshavardhan. He known as the Shakala Uttara Pathanatha. He was the famous Harshavardhan. So his copper plates also, if you look properly, that the writings are similar, because that was the kind of northern class of Brahmi that was used in the 6th and the 7th century. And in the last line, you can see this is the signature of Harsha, actually, written in a very kind of a stylized calligraphic style, where he says, Swahasta Mama, that he is signing this record. But this is not the main inscription. He has, it's written very nice, beautifully in another inscription called the Madhuban copper plate. So this is just to give you an idea that how the kings used to issue the copper plates, and in this copper plates you have your sources, which talks about the Brahmanas and the non-Brahmanas. Now, when we look at the Brahmanas in this, we see that the Brahmanas in the inscription, the Brahmanas in the real world, that is in the world of inscriptions, was more versatile than its Shastri counterpart. This is because the statement is made because we find that when you look at the Shastras, there are a lot of things that a Brahmana is not supposed to do. So he is much more, his status is much more rigid. He cannot take different kinds of professions. But I will come to that there are extraordinary circumstances when he is allowed to do that. But on the other hand, if we look at the inscriptions, we find that a Brahmana could actually take up any kind of profession, and particularly it is very interesting to note that we have an inscription from Haryana, the Pehwa, the ancient name is Prithudaka, where we have, it talks about a market for horse trading. And Ghotaka, the term used is Ghotaka. Ghotaka means a horse, and Yatra. Yatra is a kind of a periodic market, Ghotaka Yatra. And there we find that we have certain names of the Vanikas, the merchants who had assembled here. It's a Banika Meli. So the merchants have assembled here to buy horses, and these horses are coming from Udichipatha, that is Uttarapatha, because horses, India was never a very good horse breeding place. So they used to come from the northwest, and we know of the Fargana horses. If we read the history of the Kushanas, we find, I'm going back a little in history, but you have this Fargana, horses from Fargana, which the Chinese sources mention that they are blood-sweating horses, which means they're very strong. So northwest horses always were very important. And there in the list of the merchant, the name of the merchants, we have name of people with Bhatta name ending. So when B-H-A-T-T-A. So when we have this Bhatta name ending is always for the Brahmanas. So here we can know that a Brahmana is actually trading in doing animal trade, which is despised in the Manava Dharmasastra, in the Manusmriti, and it's said that he should not take up this kind of professions. So inscriptions, actually, that's why it says the real world of the inscriptions where the Brahmanas are there is more versatile than his Shastri counterpart. Now, when we look at the Brahmana donis, we find that most of the donis, like who is getting grant from the king, so it's quite natural the doni must have actually had some influence over the ruler, must be very close to the ruler, or somebody must have suggested, because in some cases we have the shamantas, the courtiers, they were suggesting that perhaps we can give this donation to this Brahmana and asking the permission of the ruler. So they were in different capacities, such as priests, which was Purohita or a Jyotisha, and or other, or sometimes ministers, and were having some important posts. And if we look at the inscriptions, we'll find that we can make tables from the inscriptions, and we find that in most of the inscriptions, when a donation is made, we have the different, a Brahmana is expert in Yajurveda or in Rigvedin Brahmana, he is from this Shakha, this Pravara, this Gotra, so entire whole caste status is described in these inscriptions. So that's why his Vedic learning, he is an expert in which kind of Vedas is also given. And here we did a small survey on the inscriptions from Kamarupa, because we have very little inscriptions. We have only 26 or 27 inscriptions from Assam. And there we found that most of the lands were donated to Yajurvedin Brahmanas. And there was this question, like it was bothering me that why we have so much of Yajurvedin Brahmanas. And I consulted with a colleague of mine from Sanskrit department in the Jadavpur University, and she told me that actually Yajurvedin Brahmanas are much adept in doing sacrifices. So for the sacrifices, they're good at performing sacrifices. So naturally, And herein comes the question of Brahmana migration. So the Brahmanas who were brought in Assam from different places, they were mostly Yajurvedic Brahmanas because perhaps the ruler wanted people who were versatile in doing sacrifices, which was a part and parcel of the life. Yesterday I showed you that we have to do this Pancha Mahayagya, that is the 5 major sacrifices which a householder had to do. So you need Brahmanas for performing all this. So, yeah, sure. Yeah. Some of them, they talk of Sravasti. There's a region called Sravasti. Some said Kanyakubja. So you have, in some cases, you have the references to the locations. And that's why we can trace that coming from different parts. And sometimes, there are 2 kinds. Some Brahmins come from outside, some Brahmins are local Brahmins, but sometimes within this area of Assam, we have small movements. Suppose the land is being donated in Guwahati region, and the Brahmin might have come from Tejpur. So it is mentioned that Sravasti Vishaya, and if you look at this Sravasti Vishaya, this is not the Sravasti of early India, which is in North India. It is a place called Sravasti, which was in the Darang district near that. So Darang, there was a village in Assam, yeah. So so we have movement of these Brahmanas coming from one region to another or one area to another.
So there are no grants which talk of, for instance, migration from Nodia? No.
No, in Assam we don't have Nodia. No.
Not at all.
Nodia, I think, developed as a seat of Brahmanas in a little later period, perhaps.
And this is pertaining to which period? And
I'm talking about from the 7th to the 12th. So we have these 3 dynasties of Assam. One is the Varman dynasty, Bhaskar Varman, as you know, his dynasty, which is also known as the Bhaumakara dynasty. Then we have the Shalastambha dynasty, that is the Mletchas, also known as the Mletchas, who were concentrated more into the Tejpur area. And then we have the Palas, but they're different from the Bengal Palas. They're the Kamrupa Palas, but emulating a lot of the Bengal Palas nature, names. And they're the Palas, and they were there till 12th. After that, we have 2-3 single rulers from Assam region, Vaidyadeva and Ballava Raja, and then comes the Ahom rule. Okay. So it is the pre-Ahom phase.
Yeah, of course. The other question, Suchandra, is are there any other information in these grants other than the fact that land is being given, etc.? Yeah. Do you get also information about the forms of worship, for instance, temples, something other practices? Basically?
Yeah. Sometimes, in these grants you have when the land is being granted, it is mentioned that this land is granted for the establishment of such and such temple. So you have this kind of references.
So Kamakhya, for instance, do any of these specifically mention
Kamakhya comes, here we have in one of the inscriptions, Kamagiri, Mahakuta Kamagiri reference is there to a temple, but Kamakhya comes a little later and you have a lot of mention of Kamakhya in the Kalika Purana, which
that's later, 17th century.
Yes, that's later. Now, coming back to this Vedic learnings, and then so we have these Brahmanas who have titles such as Acharya, Upadhyaya, Pandita. So you have this kind of, and I will give you an example later on of a region where you have the making of a Brahmana landlord. But now moving to the Shastras a little bit, and there what we find is that we have these terms called apod. This is a Sanskrit term, apad, which means that there is danger. And in Bengali, we very much use this term, that when something is happening, oh, apad, like how to do? We don't want to actually have it in us. So this is, and then we find, so there are these 2 terms. One is apad and one is the Apaddharma. So the sutras, the Dharmasastras actually coined this term Apaddharma, which I'll come later on. So Dharma Sutras, which are earlier, Bodhayana, Gautama, and others, between the 2nd century BC to, the 7th century BC to the 2nd century, when the Dharma Sutras were written. So there was this anticipation that of a crisis. So this is an extraordinary circumstance. So there was this anticipation that when a Brahmana is in crisis, then he can also do some things which normally he's not supposed to do. So this kind of the temporary abrogation of a set of rules prescribed for the Brahmana. So the most important crisis that is foreseen in case of a Brahmana is a lack of livelihood, that he doesn't have a proper livelihood. He is not asked to be a priest or something, so how can he have his sustenance? So then we find that, and he has to preserve the Brahmana Varna, the rights of he has to do this Panchamahayagyas and others which he is supposed to do. So in that case, then you have that when there is an extraordinary circumstances, then a Brahmana can actually take food from a Sudra or eat from a Sudra's hand and take some donations. But in a little later, in the Dharmasastra, we have this, when we have the emergence of the Dharmasastras, which actually began in the 2nd century BC and then continued for a very long time, we have this term apad as a more pronounced term. And then for the first time, we have just remember that the Dharma Sutras, we did not have Apaddharma. Apad was there, but not Apaddharma. Apaddharma we find in the Dharma Shastras. And so it is designed in anticipation of a crisis in the Manusmriti. So you have the Apaddharma for a Brahmana. Now, what are the normal activities of a Brahmana that he's supposed to do in the Shastras? So he's supposed to teach, he's supposed to study, offer sacrifices, officiate at sacrifices, give and accept gifts. These are the normal activities. Now, in case of abnormalities, like he's not having, and generally migration also comes in such situations when there is a lack of livelihood in a particular region, then the Brahmana is forced to move from his region to suppose to a periphery region where he knows that there are dearth of Brahmanas, and where suppose this region has been included in we know the idea of the expansion of the state society, and where many forest states and other states were included with the Brahmanical monarchical structure. So there were dearth of Brahmanas, and perhaps the Brahmanas moved from one place to another. So this was one of the causes taken to be for migration. Now, in case of abnormal times, so what can a Brahmana do? He can take up the occupation of a Kshatriya and a Vaishya, but never a Shudra, by teaching. That's in the Manu. That's in Manu. By teaching, officiating at the sacrifices of, and accepting gifts from anybody, including a Sudra. So he should not take up an occupation of the Sudra, but he can take gifts from a Shudra. So this is very interesting phenomenon. So you should not take an occupation of a Sudra. But when we look at the scenario, we do not know, we do not have that much of sources, but we have terms where perhaps you have Brahmana Mahattara, who is a householder Brahmana. But then when I mention of the traders who are taking up profession of animal trade, it is mentioned in the text that animal trade is an extremely demeaning work for a Brahmana, but he's taking in that trade, so that is happening. So there is this dichotomy, and I will show you another seal, which a little later, where we find that a Brahmana is taking up the occupation of a Navika, of a sailor, which is also not sanctioned by the Shastras. So the Shastras continued to be concerned with the Brahmanas in the context of Apad, and the Brahmana is not allowed to shift to an alternative occupation in crisis, but to extend his activities. What does Manu say? According to Manu, I quote him, "A Brahmin firmly committed to his way of life and unwilling to follow the Vaishya occupations may pursue the following law when he is languishing through lack of livelihood." So the main concern is lack of livelihood. "A Brahmin who has fallen on hard times may accept gifts from anybody. That something pure can be sullied is impossible according to the law. By teaching, officiating at the sacrifices of and accepting gifts from despicable individuals, Brahmins do not incur any sin, for they are like fire and water. So fire and water is pure. It cannot be impaired. So similarly, Brahmin cannot incur any sin, whether he is taking a food from a Sudra or not. So this is the dictum. So this is how the society actually was, the norms of the society were structured. But what I'm trying to make you understand is that there were things beyond the norms, beyond the Shastric norms. And here is an example which we do not find in Indian, from the Indian side. This is from actually Southeast Asia. It is from Peninsular Thailand. And this seal has been found. It's a golden seal, and you can see the handle at the back, and it's round. And here it is very clearly written, like Navikas. I'll show you. No, I can show it from here. This is a symbol which is known as Apaddharma, and this has been found in a lot of coins from Southeast Asia. Now we all know about India's interaction with Southeast Asia. I'm not talking of Indianization, but there were a lot of interactions. And because of those interactions, we had a lot of influences coming in and going. So there were adaptation and adoption. So now you have this sealing from there, and it's actually Brahmi. So you have Brahmi written, so you have this Bhadrapita, which is found in the coins. Then you have this person called Brihaspati Sharma, and here we have the Navikasa. So it is Navikasa Brihaspati Sharma, his seal. So this seal belongs to Navika, a Navika, who is Brihaspati Sharma, and he is issuing this seal. So now the name ending Sharma is always a Brahmana. So how do we actually engage with the fact that a Brahmana is a sailor, when we know the dictums of Manu and we know of other Yagyavalkya Smriti also, when it says that a Brahmana should not take into sailing, should not go for shipping or into the high sea voyages. To the extent, if you read Manu Smriti, you'll find that it says that even if a Brahmana goes for sailing, then one should not actually go even to his Shraddha, so attend the Shraddha ceremony. So this kind of injunction was there, but here we find, so a Brahmana who had become a Navika. To my mind, because we have, and this region is on the Andaman Sea, Peninsular Thailand, and to my mind, he perhaps was a Mahanavika. It's not just a Navika. Because of the lack of space, we do not have the term Mahanavika, because as early as the 1st century CE, we have reference to a Mahanavika from a place in Andhra called Ghantashala. Ghantashala is, you must be knowing Masulipatnam. So Masulipatnam was ancient Masalia or Mysolia, and from just near to ancient Mysolia or Masalia was Ghantasala. This was a region, was ancient Kantakasilla of Ptolemy, where we find an inscription given by a lady. And in this inscription, the lady says that it's a donative record, and the lady says that she is the wife of a Mahanavika and the daughter-in-law of a Gahapati. Yesterday I mentioned the importance of a Gahapati. So which means the Gahapati has accumulated so much of wealth that now his son is actually taking to the sea, and he is a master mariner. A Mahanavika is a master mariner who perhaps owns a ship. And she is proud to be said as a daughter-in-law of a Gahapati, because Gahapati had a very rich social position, as in the Buddhist texts I mentioned yesterday. So perhaps here also, because an ordinary Navika cannot have a golden seal. So he must be a Mahanavika, to my mind. Of course, this is an assumption, because here it's written Navika. But what comes out from this kind of evidence is that, and we have a lot of Mahanavikas from another inscription in a much later, this is the Ahadanakaram plates, where you have reference to 5 Mahanavikas and 7 Mahasartavas, found in the Tamil Nadu, Andhra region. So this is another inscription which me and my student we have written on that. A very interesting inscription where we have a lot of data on the internal trade networks. But I'm digressing a little bit. But what comes out is that a Navika is issuing a seal, and his name is Brihashpati Sharma. So that is very clear, and which shows that the society was also accommodating this kind of things in spite of the injunctions of the Shastras. I have discussed a little bit of Brahmana migration when she was having her questions. But then again, moving back to this migration, I just would like to mention that there were two groups of the Panchagaura. The idea of Panchagaura from the north and Panchadravida, that Brahmanas were brought from this, or included this sort of people like the Saraswata Gaura, Kanyakubja Maithila, and Utkala Brahmanas. And in the Panchadravida group, we have the Gurjaras, and which is very striking because the Gurjaras are not actually beyond the Vindhyas. But we have them in the list, the Maharashtrias, sorry, Karnatakas, Trailangas, and Dravidas. So now this Panchagaura, this is the reference to Gaura region. Now what was Gaura? Gaura was actually, as I mentioned, Shashanka. Gaura was originally a small area which is in the present-day Murshidabad region. And then ultimately when Shashanka made Gaura a regional power, so it encompassed the entire Bengal and part of eastern India. And then in the Harsha Charita, therefore, Shashanka is referred to as Gaura, Bhushanga, Ghora, Pashanda, because he was against Harsha. So that's how the term, that connotation of the term Gaura extended to a larger area. And then we have Bhagpati's Gauravaha, which also shows that the term Gaura, Eastern India was actually meant when we talk of Gaura. And now when we have this idea of Panchagaura as a northern group, so these regions, the Kanakubja, Maithila, and all Utkala, Orissa, all comes within the fold of Panchagauras. So normally, these Gaura, these Saraswata Brahmanas, the Kanakubja Brahmanas, they were regarded as a very revered Brahmanas, and so they were brought in for purposes of worship and other groups. So with these land grants, some of the Brahmanas became landlords. And I will give you one example. Like, we had this term, when we look at the Shastras, we have this term that there are 3 tiers. At the uppermost tier is the Swami, that is the Raja, the Maharaja or the Raja Swami. In the middle level, you have a term called Bhujya Manakya. Bhuj dhatu is bhuj, means to enjoy. So Bhujya Manaka, one who is an enjoyer. And then you have the Karshaka. So it is a 3-tier society. Now this intermediary society, like a group, like the Bhujya Manakyas, were the Brahmanas who were the enjoyers of the land. So therefore, we have the making of a class of Brahmanas quite prominent in some of the regions, in some of the inscriptions, not in all places. Like if you look at Kamrupa, or if you look at the inscriptions of the Palas or the Shenas, we do not have such kind of making of the Brahmanas because the donations mostly went to the monasteries. Or here in Kamrupa, we had donations to Brahmanas, but not in such a great way. But in case of, I'm talking about the Gahadvalas ruled around 10th to 12th centuries. They were mainly ruling in the Varanasi, Kanauj, Kanakubja area. And they had like lot of inscriptions, and they were very performer of Brahmanical rituals. Each of the rulers, something small happening in the family, this to go to Prayaga, take a bath. If you look at the inscriptions, they take a bath and immediately donate to some Brahmanas. So it was always a very, and they had a lot of rituals doing. And it was, interestingly, it was the Gahadvalas who introduced a very interesting tax. This is called the Turushka Danda. So we have this name of the tax called Turushka Danda, which was introduced by them. And perhaps we do not know exactly for which purpose. So the Turkish invasion was already there, and it was also in the offing. So perhaps the Gahadvala rulers were emulating a kind of funds to fight away the Turkish. So you have the Turushka Danda, that this says you have to pay. Or in another opinion, that the Turushkas who were there in the territory, they were asked to pay a separate kind of tax. So there are two explanations, but we do not know which was actually the cause. But the inclusion of Turushka Danda is interesting. Now, in this Gahadavala, among the Gahadavala rulers, there was this Govinda Chandra, who was a very important Gahadavala ruler. And we find that he had a minister, actually chief, not a minister, chief priest, called Jagu Sharman. And he went on granting land to this family of Jagu Sharman to the extent that, and his son Praharaja Sharman was also getting land, and the family members also got, to the extent that you have, like, we learned that Jagu Sharman was given 10 villages by Govinda Chandra, situating in about 10 different pattalas, that is districts. And then you have this son, Praharaja. So more or less 20 to 28 villages were granted to this family, Brahman family of Jagu Sharman. So when you see that, sorry, I missed that apart from the grants received by the father and son, that two other members of the family, Vyasa, the uncle, and Maharaja Sharman, another son of Jagu Sharman, was also granted a village. Thus, in totality, this family received 20 villages and half of a village with all the usual privileges and dues. So we can easily understand that if you have 20 villages under your control, so you are a landed magnate. You become very rich. So this creation of landed magnates was done here. And through a map, we can show you. If you look at this, these are the concentration of granted villages. And these are the fine spots from where the grants have been found. One thing we have to also remember when we are looking at copper plates, that sometimes copper plates belong to that particular locality from which it has been found. But they are also portable. So they could have moved from one place to another. But nowadays, scholars are trying to locate the villages. And sometimes, as yesterday we were saying that there was continuity, so we have continuation of the village names in many places. So we can actually plot those villages which was there in such an early time. So here you can see this, these are on the bank of the Ganges, and this family actually had all these areas under their possession. So naturally, they became very rich. The other Brahmanas from the Gahadavala records that we find were having the title of the Pandita Diveda, one who is expert, Divedi, from where we have the surname called Divedi, one who is an expert in the two Vedas. Then Dikshita, then we have, and then interestingly, we have Thakura and Rauta. Now, Thakura and Rauta are titles which are also given to the feudatories, to the Shamantas. Now, the Brahmanas also became Shamantas, feudatory lords, because of their amount of land that they were having. So they were having these titles called Thakura and Rauta. And so we have instances where the father was a Thakura while the son was a Rauta. So son became one up in the social ladder. So these grants exhibit the transformation of a Brahman functionary to a landed magnate. Now I will come to a completely different kind of, we'll talk about a different kinds of information where we have actually the non-Brahmana landholders. And this is from an example from I have one example from southeastern Bangladesh and mostly from Assam. And with the help of a few inscriptions, I will show that how the boundaries given in a copper plate charters. For example, when you have one particular, you grant a particular land, suppose this is a land, and this land is being granted. Now, you will have other things on the boundary of these lands. So these were always there in the charters, sometimes very defined, sometimes not much defined. In some cases, rulers defined a lot. But it was not taken notice much. It was B.D. Chattopadhyay who had actually drawn our attention to this, that we have to look at these boundaries and find some aspects of the rural settlement. So in case of Assam, we find that the last dynasty which I mentioned, the Pala dynasty, they were so, I would like to say that they were so determined to fix the boundaries, that there should be no kind of intrusion. They did not have only north, south, east, west. They had north, northeast, north, northwest, south, southeast. So it was sometimes like an octagonal form. And the rulers, the earlier rulers, had 8 boundaries, and they used to say Ashtashima. So there are 8 boundaries. So you have this kind of boundaries. And in the boundaries, actually, we get the names of the non-Brahmana landholders, who are not mentioned in any kind of royal records other than this. So which shows that the presence of people like weavers, boatmen, that they also possessed land can be had from this. As I mentioned yesterday, that we are working with sources which are very limited. We don't have an archive. We have a few inscriptions. And from these inscriptions, we have to actually organize and reconstruct what we are trying to do. So I've already mentioned the 3 different dynasties. I'm not going into that. I think I'll better. Yeah. Now let us have a look at the map of Assam. This is, of course, a political map, but here the Brahmaputra flows like this. Now, in the inscriptions, we always have, when we talk of land grants, we always have, like, in the Uttarakula, in the northern bank of the Brahmaputra, or in the Dakshinakula of Brahmaputra. So they mention the Uttarakula and the Dakshinakula, and we have, whenever we talk of Assam, we call Upper Assam, Lower Assam, because it is, the Brahmaputra is flowing like that, and this region is the Upper Assam, and this region is the Lower Assam. Now, kindly note that the region around these areas, these are where you have a lot of autochthonous people, the tribes, so-called tribes who were settled there. And there also we had inscriptions which talks about the non-Brahmana holders. Now, I mentioned about the boundary markers, which should be actually taken into consideration. And what we see that from the study of these boundary markers is that the special characteristics of the rural settlement. How was the rural settlement determined? Or the relationship with the natural and particularly water resources. I'm here for this lecture since my focus is on non-Brahmana landholders. I'm not going into the details of the water resources, but if one looks at the inscriptions, they'll find that in some inscriptions, the land had only water bodies around and nothing else. So which shows that these areas were both Devamatrika and Nadimatrika, which means that they have perennial rainfall and they have so much of water bodies. They did not need irrigation per se, as you need in this part in the arid landscape of Gujarat, Rajasthan, and others. Today, I was asked that do we have such kind of baulis when we went to Adalaj, that do we have some kind of wells in eastern India? We do not, because it was not required. The landscape did not require such kind of high level of intricate architectural masonry for this water bodies. So water was a very important, and in our epigraphs, if you look at the epigraphic sources, the water bodies, waterscape, they are in plenty. And of course, we know also of the riverine warfares, which were, suppose in one inscription from Assam, it is said that the king is preparing his, actually it's a strategy for him, and he's preparing his boats. So the term used is Rachitam no Chakra, because he will fight through the river, and so he's preparing his boats, and he'll fight with whom? With the Vanga people. Vanga means present-day Dhaka in Bangladesh. So there was this riverine connection. So they were not fighting over land, they were fighting through the river. So this kind of rivers played a very important role. So water resources were very much there. But when we look at these inscriptions, that we find that though, of course, Brahmana were a larger section because the lands were being donated to the Brahmanas, but we also have people who had been owners of land. They had some amount of land, and they formed a significant part. So from there, from these inscriptions, we can try to trace the ethnic, occupational, or professional character of these non-Brahmana landholders using only one source, that is the epigraphic records. This is a kind of a representation that when we read the inscriptions, we have description of the land and how the inscriptions, I will show you how the inscriptions read. Now, when you try to project it in a kind of a picture, then you find here you have, this is the plot of land which is donated. So you have Nokova, this is a person whose name is Nokova. So when you have such, and he's autochthonous, it's a non-Sanskritic name. So he is not a Brahmana. So, and then you have Pushkarini. So that is again a tank. We had in inscriptions terms like Pushkarini, Taraga. Taraga is Tataka, Taraga, which you also find in inscriptions from Rajasthan and others. Then Avari, this is perhaps a place. Then you have Chandrapuri, and this Chandrapuri is also mentioned in other records. Interestingly, you have these two, Dashalangala, which means these are the name of a village. So this northeast part of this particular land is covered by this village, which is known as Dashalangala, which is a very interesting term because it is the place. So it could be that it implies a large settlement portraying the image of being cultivated. Langal, you know, it's plow. So being cultivated by 10 plows, maybe in, not theoretically, but which suggests that it was a huge thing. R.S. Sharma has drawn our attention to informations like we have Dasha Halika, Shata Halika, that 100 halas, a person having 100 halas. So which shows that this sort of terms were being used in inscriptions of early India. Now, this is the way the boundaries are, give you an example, the boundaries are depicted. This is the Suwalkuchi copperplate grant of Ratnapāla, early 11th century, 1036. And it gives the following boundaries: a Sarkara Mula, that is a tree having a sweet root, and a mango tree to the east, with a bend situated on a brick field on the common. A brick field is known as Ishtakhetra, on the common boundary of Chandanoki. Now, please note the names. Noki, Chandanoki. To the southeast, a cluster of cane tree on the boundary common to Dakshapati Noki. Then we have, I'm not reading the entire thing to bore you. So we have Sadhava Noki. Then we have to the west a silk cotton tree. Silk cotton tree was known as Shalmali Briksha. And this is important from Assam because one of the products of Assam is silk. It's very important. And we have mention of lots of Kasimbala or Shalmali Briksha, which abounded in Assam, which were very important. And then we have recently planted on the boundary common to Chandanauki. To the northwest, the southern part of Kalangadandi, he is also a person and a tree and all. So when you have this name ending Noki, so definitely it comes from Noka. Noka means a boat in the common the language. And here it becomes an interesting. So a boatman has a surname which is related to his own profession. So he is a boatman, and you have a lot of references. This is one example, but you have other examples also where you have reference to Nokis, Noka, No Shimni. So No comes in a large way because we have the riverine landscape of Assam. So it comes in. So when we study inscriptions, what are the things that we also look at when we, not just what is written in the inscription, but the area from where it has been found, the landscape that comes out from the inscription, and the context. So definitely we have a lot of boatmen there. Then again, we look at the Guwahati copper plate of Indraprala, and there you have reference to a bil. Bil is a kind of a water body. In Sanskrit, it is villa. And it's near Bil, there is generally a mossy land. So you have this kind of area. Then Kshetra Ali is actually, when you see, it's a small ditch kind of thing, embankment. So when the plot is, actually you divide the plots, you have the small upper hill kind of things. So that is the Kshetra Ali, that is called Ali. Ali is a bund kind of thing. On the boundary, and then you have south, the Bhoga Dirghika. So Dirghika is again a long as a tank of the, but this Bhoga Dirghika belongs to the Kaivartas, Shalpaduti. And we don't know the meaning of Shalpaduti Kaivarta. Why it is called Shalpaduti, we do not know. But Shalpaduti Kaivartas and then a Kshatrali, and then it continues. So here again we find reference to the fishing community. The Kaivartas were the fishing community as well as agriculturists. So we have two kinds of Kaivartas, the Jele, like the fishermen and the agriculturist. So you have. So therefore, an occupation which is closely related with water bodies is fishing, and therefore you have so much of reference to a Kaivarta owning a big Dirghika. Dirghika means a big pond. So which shows that he had a status in the society, and it is mentioned in the inscription. So ownership of a water body was very important. And this also happened not in Kamrup. I'm talking of the east. But if we look at Rajasthan, we have seen that when one possesses an oraghatto, so it enhances the status of the person. Oraghatto is a kind of a wheel, water device. So the Kaivartas, though, if you look at the social thing, the Kaivartas are lower in the social rung. They are not in a high position. But here, they are an important social group owning a particular tank, and so therefore has been mentioned as a part of the boundary for the land. Then again, we have Shubhankara Pataka. This is another inscription. I will not go into the details, but here what is interesting is that the names of the rivers, and with this we have this name of the persons called Kurmanatha. Then we have this mention of the silk tree being planted. The next inscription, which is another part, we have two inscriptions where we have a reference to some interesting social groups, but let us see this. So this is again another layout where this is Pataka. Pataka is also a hamlet. So you have Shubhankara Pataka, then Shakota tree, and these are the Shatka Shasanas. Now these Shatka Shasanas belonged, it was a type, Shatka Shasana meant a type of legal control over the land. So you have, here you have all Sanskritic name holders like Kurmanatha, Kumaranatha. These people are having control over the land. So we have categories where we have Brahmanas, who are landowners, who are used as donis. Then we have categories of people who are perhaps important and were in charge of these Shatkas, the legal landholdings, like Kurmanatha and other people. And then we have these persons like the Kaivartas. I'm coming to the weavers, the Kaivartas who had actually had control of land or control of pond, because we have reference to another inscription of Avanchi Kaivartas, who was also very important as landowners and mentioned in the inscription. Then we have the Jinna river. Now, in the history of Assam, if we look at this word called Di, Diong, Difu, the Jinna, these are actually the local. The Boros had this name which starts with the regions, which starts at D. So, and recently a work has been done by Nirod Barua, who has worked on the historical geography of Assam and tried to show that from where do we get this ostric origin of this term, Dirguma, Dirjunna, and which is related to the Boro tribes. So this is one, but I have this other part. When we look at the other part of this copper plate, there we have references to the land of Orangi Tantras. Now, Orangi Tantras, Tantra is equivalent to weaving, Tantu, Tanta, so Tantra. So we have in another inscription the 24 Tantra Nambhu, that it's a village of 24 weavers, which actually Arish Sharma thought that here it was an example where these people who were having this occupation of weaving, they have been converted to having small plots of land, because this entire village belonged to this 24 these weavers. But I'd like to differ, because there is no reason to believe that even if the weavers have possession of land, that means they're leaving their profession. So just because it was their land, it's mentioned as Tantranambhu, but it's not, it must be a village of the weavers. So there were two different kinds of villages. Some villages were very heterogeneous, where many kind of people have lived perhaps, and in some villages were particular important for one kind of occupational groups. So here we have the Orangi Tantras. Now there is this Orang, this region called Orang has been located by Nirod Barua and others in the Darang district. And this inscription has been found in further south, in the Nogang. So therefore, we can say that people from these weavers from the Darang district, they have moved into the Nogang area, and where they were actually getting this land. I'll come to that a little later. And what is interesting is that they're so precise that you have reference to a banyan tree, and like they differentiate between an ashwatha, that this is an ashwatha tree, and a banyan tree with hanging roots. And the term used, maybe Madhumita will understand, Jhori Pakoti. Jhori Pakoti, the roots of the banyan tree. So they're using that particular term, Jhori Pakoti, in the inscription. So in a Sanskrit inscription, there's some words, local words are creeping in by the time of the 11th century. This we find also in case of Bengal, because we have this Sahitya Parishad copper plate of Vishwarup Sena, and there it talks about plantation. And normally to plant is ropon, ropavati, it should be ropaita. There the term used is lagano, lagavaita. So you have this inclusion of the local language popping in. So here we have this example. Then we have a person called Dhumara Deva. Now Dhumara Deva could have been a local deity also, holding of Dhumara Deva. So maybe there was a temple, we do not know, or a person. So hanging roots. Then you have, finally it's very interesting that they talk about, there is a Kasimbala tree on the margin of the land of Brihad Rabha. Now this Rabha is a community that we come across in the Gwalpara area, Gwalpara, Bangaigaon area of this Assam. It's in the southern lower Assam region. And it's part of the now, if you know about the Boro land and Boro struggle, the Rabhas are a part of that whole entire group. Now, interestingly, we have this term, Brihat Rabha. Now, what does it mean? So, it's a land of Brihat Rabha. So, this term Brihat has been used in two senses in Bengal inscriptions. For example, we have Sarthavaha, which is a caravan trader, in one inscription from southeastern Bangladesh, where it is called Brihat Shartivaha. So he can be a great, or he must be a leader of the Rabhas. So the community of Rabhas is mentioned, and he is the leader of that community. So he is known to be a Brihat Rabha. So this kind of reference, so you have in the copper plates, unknowingly, very implicitly, it's not explicit, but you have reference to people having different kinds of profession. And then we have reference to Hari. Hari is a potter. So land of, there is a Dijjarati. Dijjarati is the name of the person, land of Dijjarati Hari. So you have Brihat Rabha, you have this Tantranambhu, 24-26 Tantranambhu, then you have Orangi Tantras. So different kind of professional groups are mentioned here. This, I think, yeah, this is of the second plate, where you have now the land of the Brihat Rabha. Then you have Vijayasri Naubhukta. Vijayasri Naubhukta is a little like perhaps this person who was in charge of the boats were mentioned as Vijayasri Naubhukta. Then we have different kinds of trees. Actually, a study on the natural surroundings can also be done from these boundaries. Then you have this tree with the hanging roots, then land of Bhallabithi. These are all peoples. So mention of, in some cases, we do not have the profession. So it is just common people holding of this. But which gives you an idea that there were common people who were in possession of land. And here again, then you have the silk cotton tree. So this is the layout that you can land of Brihadrava, then land of Orangitantra. So Brihadrava, Orangitantra, they all lived in nearby areas. They were neighbors, perhaps, the small different kinds of villages. So what comes out from these inscriptions, we find that there was a kind of a social and economic status which were gained by persons belonging to occupational groups. Ponds names after their owners, indicating the spatial status as owners of water bodies. And what struck, like it's very striking, and it struck me when I was reading this, because even in the Bengal inscriptions always we do not have such huge, beautiful boundary descriptions. Was that the kind of care that was taken by the ruler for the gifted land, that there should not be any kind of violation, any kind of encroachment on the land so that anybody could come, because the boundary is so clearly defined. So defined boundary actually shows that land was important. So it was the specificity of the land had to be maintained in order to avoid any kind of confusion. This I have already mentioned. I am not going into this, that boundary of Chaturvingshati Tantra Rambhu. Tantra means loom, that this area was inhabited by the occupational group of weavers. This, again, I have already talked about, that the Jinna Vishaya and the Orangis migrated to this region after crossing the Brahmaputra. As Darang, as I mentioned, that we have always the Uttarakula and the Dakshina Kala. So Orangi, if it is in the Darang district, then it is in the northern part of the Brahmaputra. And now they're into the Gwalpara Bangagaon region, which is in the southern part. So from the northern part, they're moving into southern part. That shows the mobility of the, so inward, like if you look at in the small space also, there is a kind of mobility. It is not a stuck kind of thing. Mobility of the occupational groups. This is another inscription where, like we had Briddha Rava, we had the term Briddha Grama. So so therefore there is, it shows that it's common to use this term for a old village, for a prosperous village. Then I also mentioned the Jarati Hari. Hari signifies the potter caste and having a land in possession. So we have already finished that. So what do we find? And I'll go to one Bengal inscription, and then finally I will wind up. That it is, apart from Brahmanas, so we have the Tantravayas, Koivatas, boatmen, potters, indigenous local groups like Rabhas, some persons whose occupation status is not known, referred to owned landed property. So this place display a kind of social and economic status gained by persons belonging to occupational groups. The internal structure of a village settlement associated with a particular occupational group or community, like the weavers mentioned above, could be different. So there were different kinds of, like when you have a heterogeneous settlement of heterogeneous social composition, and again you can have a settlement where only one occupational group actually lived, along with perhaps the Brahmanas and others. Finally, I'm moving into a little bit, but not very far from Kamrup. It is the Samatata area. Samatata is the present-day Kumilla region in Bangladesh. And here you have this Gunaigar inscription. It's a huge inscription, very important and very early. It's early 6th century. Talks about one Vainagupta who is not from the imperial Gupta family. He's different, but he's a local ruler of this region. He is a Maharaja Vainagupta. But what is striking is that in his description of the boundaries, we have a lot of, again, people from the different occupational groups. And here we have an occupational group called the Vilalas. Now, who is a Vilala? We have names of Midu Vilala, Pakka Vilala, and there are different Vilalas. Now, the exact meaning of Bilala has not been found, but Monier-Williams' dictionary shows that Bilala could be a mechanic. So perhaps this person was doing some kind of mechanical jobs. We do not know. But interestingly, recently an inscription has been published by Ryosuke Furui from Japan, which belonged to the same ruler, Vainagupta. And there also you have a lot of Vilalas as landholders, which means in the Kumilla region in Bangladesh, these Bilalas were an important occupational groups. So if they are kind of mechanics or working on some kind of mechanical things, we do not know, but they must be very important in the society to have this kind of things. Then we have the carpenter, Vardhaki, who is also owners of land. And then we have also, I've not mentioned it here, but in the new inscription, we had some people called with the name ending Bangalo. So perhaps they were from Bangladesh and they had come here and settled in this region. So again, you have Ganeshwara Bilalo, this they are actually occupying Pushkarinis, tanks, and all these things. So what comes out actually, and this is the Gunaigar, these are the Gunaigar plots. So you can see that this is the Sri Nashirampura Nekhar Kshetra. So these, we can have the idea of the different kinds of Kshetras that were there. And then, again, lowland belonging to Bihara. So, and very interestingly, it said the channel opens to boat. So that boats were also very much a part of the entire landscape, the riverine landscape. It's very clear from this boundary descriptions. This has been done by Rajat Shannal. He is a colleague of mine from the Department of Archaeology, who is an expert in doing. When I give him, like, I tell him, you do this, and he makes this charts for me. This is another part of this boundary limit where he talks of Pushkarinis. Then you asked about whether there is temple or something. So here in this Gunaigar Madhumita, there is the temple of Pradumneshwara here. And it talks about Buddhist viharas, and it talks about temples also, the worship in the temples. And this also comes from boundaries. So finally, while concluding, I can say that this, I already mentioned actually, but it helps us, these boundaries should be taken more for studying different boundaries of different regions. Now some people are doing that to reconstruct the landscape of the rural settlements described in the charters, and social cross-section, which indicates a great amount of people, the different kinds of people that were actually inhabiting a particular space. So you get an idea of the rural settlement. How was a rural settlement designed? So whether they were nucleated settlements or the Kshetra here, the Vastu here, where are they located? So this you can, and here from Assam we understand the Kshetra and the Vastu were different, because when you have this boundary, you don't have the house of thing. You have, it is always the land of someone or the Pushkarini of someone. So it shows that the land and the homestead was in a separate area. And finally, that as a result of ownership or enjoyment of the donated land became more precise and secure. This is a sure marker of the growing recognition and prevalence of individual property rights in the area under review. I wouldn't say that as we understand ownership of land, it was like that before. But some kind of possession was definitely there. Otherwise, why the ruler would take the trouble to mention that this land belonged to this person? So he must be staying there. He must be having some kind of possession. So the actual status of some of these non-Brahmana groups was different from the relatively low ritual position laid down in the Varna Jati norms. For example, the Kaivartas. The Kaivartas are in low social structure if we look at the Varna Jatis. But when we look about the mention in the inscription, owning a plot of land, owning a Pushkarini, so maybe their social status was higher in that particular village, though as a group they are low in the social rank. Thank you.